Hello, my name is Daniel Carty, and with me today is Natsuki Nakamura. We are both members of the Ward Working Group and co-authors of the Bozeman Water Adequacy Municipal Ballot Initiative. Okay, so who is the Ward Working Group? We are a local grassroots intergenerational group of renters and homeowners. We come from a variety of socioeconomic and educational backgrounds. We are bakers, biologists, beekeepers, teachers, students, and others who are working to make Bozeman an affordable place to live where you work. So, what is the Bozeman Water Adequacy Ballot Initiative timeline? Essentially, um, we got the ballot initiative approved for signature collecting in March of 2025. We had 90 days to collect signatures from 15% of Bozeman registered voters. That was 5,400 signatures that we needed. We collected 5,800 signatures by June 23rd. And so we are on the ballot. Ballots will be mailed out in a few days on October 17th and must be returned to the Gallatin County Elections Department by November 4th, 8 p.m. So, what is the Bozeman Water Adequacy Ballot Initiative, also known as WARD? Essentially, the initiative amends um, Bozeman Municipal Code to allow development to pay cash in lieu of water rights only if the development provides 33% or more of dwelling units as restricted by deed for 99 years, or as long as the law allows. Affordable units will be sold at 120% area median income or rented at 60% or less of AMI. This would apply to all residential development of 3 units or more. The initiative also repeals the ability of residential development to satisfy its water adequacy requirement by implementing off-site water efficiency or conservation measures. So there are some additional components to the initiative that I'd like to present to you. First, the initiative has two proposed deletions, one of which is to remove off-site water efficiency or conservation measures, and the other is to eliminate a provision in the Water Adequacy Code that allows developers and the city to come to an agreement whereby they could opt out of cash in lieu of water rights. So both of our deletions are designed to funnel developers of residential development through the cash in lieu of water rights program, where 99% of all developments go anyway. Some additional provisions of the initiative are that all affordable units must be built to the same size and quality as market rate units. And the other one is that the city of Bozeman would be required to allocate all residential units for sale or for rent by random lottery. And finally, all residential units in any particular site plan or master site plan, the affordable units would need to be allocated randomly, allocated evenly through all buildings and within all buildings in a development.
Okay, so this is a graph that the city has used and presented as recently as October 2023. This shows that our reliable water supply could be surpassed by the demand sometime between 2027 and 2033, depending on climate conditions. So we have since taken, as a city, a variety of water conservation measures, including watering restrictions that are permanent, as well as some turf restrictions on new developments, landscaping requirements that can reduce some of our water. So with those water conservation efforts, the city has expects that our water supply is extended that projection. However, it's important to note that our water supply is still finite in the area, and we are drought prone, so it's highly dependent on snow in a particular year. So since then, this is from February 2025, the City of Bozeman released some updated numbers showing that in a given year, or in 2024, we used about 43% of our water supply. But with the development that they approved, that's closer to 49%. And then in drought conditions, that would be closer to 68%, including the development approved. So the city has said this is fine because it's less than 100%, that we've taken a lot of conservation measures. But it's important to note that as the city grows, it should take into account that water rights in the Gallatin Valley are currently oversubscribed. We're in a closed basin, which means the water rights in a drought year would have to go to the highest priority. So we cannot preempt someone else's more senior water rights. And also, it's important to note that the impacts on the Gallatin River can already be seen with unprecedented low levels of water. So part of this conversation with this initiative is thinking about that water conservation should provide for current and future residents, but also think about climate resiliency, especially in uncertain climate conditions or droughts, and thinking about the water conservation for wider ecological health. So what is Cash-In-Lieu of water rights? As I mentioned before, we are in a closed basin, which means that all the water rights in our area have been allocated or over-allocated. So that means that if we want new development, if we can't, it's difficult to get new water rights since they've already been allocated in our area. So currently, about the city says 98 or 99% of new developments use Cash-In-Lieu of water rights. That means they pay cash to the city to access the water rights that the city already has. So instead of bringing new water or increasing our water supply. So that cash of the Cash-In-Lieu can be used for a variety of things. So it can use to buy future water rights if such become available, or they can be used to explore alternative water sources. The city has mentioned trying to explore groundwater wells or large-scale water transfer, such as pipelines from Canyon Berry. That was an idea that they pitched early 2024 as a way to increase our water supply using a different basin than the one that we are in currently. Again, as I mentioned before, Bozeman's water supply is finite. So even if we do conservation measures, the water that we can access with our water rights is a finite amount, and it is variable based on climate conditions. So to talk a little bit about the AMI, what does affordability mean as defined in our initiative. We talk about the affordable for rent units being affordable at 60% AMI. AMI is area median income, so 60% of the area median income. That's one person making around 50,000 or a family of four making around 71,000. For sale, the affordable units have to be for sale at the 120% AMI level. So that would be one person making around 100,000. And that would be a for sale home just under 500,000. And a for sale home, that's like a 3-bedroom home. So that's what the affordable for sale units would have to be. The affordable for rent, for example, like a 2-bedroom would be around 1,600. These are AMIs, a number that's updated annually based on the housing, federal housing reports that they do update every year. So a little bit about our current housing situation. This is from a recent report that the City of Bozeman paid a consultant to run some numbers. This is from September 2025, showing that a vacancy rate of multifamilies or apartments or multi-unit developments has a vacancy rate recently of 20%. It has climbed steadily as we have seen a big increase in the last couple of years of building apartments or these other larger buildings. And so what this graph shows to me is that we don't necessarily have a housing shortage. We have plenty of units, but we have a mismatch between the units available or being built and what the people can afford. So that's why we have a 20% vacancy. Some of those units might be absorbed, but some of those units might be just wholly inaccessible to people who can't afford it. Okay. should I take this? Okay. So who needs affordable housing? So on the rental side, again, this initiative defines affordability at the 60% AMI. So about half of Bozeman households are renters, and about half of those are at that 60% AMI level or less. So 60% AMI is one person making around 50,000 a year, or that's about one person earning $24 an hour if they're working full time. So this is a pretty significant sector of our workforce. Hospitality services is one of the largest sectors in Bozeman, and it's one of the largest growing sectors as well. So that a recent report estimates that the average hospitality AMI is around that 65% level. So this 60% AMI affordable rentals would hopefully serve some of those workforce that work in hospitality or other industries making about that same pay. So what does the city try to do currently to get more affordable housing, especially on the rental side? The city has what's called the Affordable Housing Ordinance, or AHO. They adopted a version of this in 2022. And they unfortunately defined affordability at the time at a different level, at an 80% AMI. So someone making more than what we'd have defined here, which means that the rental units that are considered affordable are also more expensive. But using these incentives, they give out things such as increased height for a building or reduced parking. And so in exchange for those benefits to the builders, they would build some affordable units. So the city said since adopting this ordinance in 2022, they updated in 2024. They've said that since 2022, they've credited this incentives for helping 1,800 units. But important to note that only about 371 have actually been built or in construction right now. So since 2022, and so the rest of those units are in the pipeline. So maybe two will be built sometime later this year or in the next 2 to 4 years, if they all end up moving forward. So some people might have heard of the Guthrie. That was an example of a project utilizing these incentives. They asked for additional height, reduced parking, and they actually, part of the issue with those is that they made very small units, and with the higher definition of what counts as affordable, it ended up being that a one bedroom could go for somewhere between 17 and 1900 per month, and that was considered affordable, or is considered affordable under these incentives. And so per square foot, or even just as a unit, it's actually quite expensive compared to some of the market rate units that aren't even using any of these incentives. And then lastly of note, the city's incentives, the most desirable incentive for developers is probably the reduced parking, because they can build units there instead of providing off-street parking for their tenants. So that was probably the strongest incentive that the city was trying to use. Unfortunately, with HB 492, which passed in the most recent state legislature, that says that the city cannot require any parking for any units that are 1,200 square feet or less. And so that means if we have a new 4-story apartment building with 1 or 2 bedroom units, all of which are less than 1,200 square feet each, that means that whole apartment complex is not required, cannot be required to provide any parking. And so whether it's affordable or not, they don't have to provide any parking for those units that are relatively small. So that means that that incentive of trying to exchange parking reductions for affordable units is no longer effective if everybody gets that benefit, regardless if they build affordable or not.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about incentives for luxury development that the city offers as well. So some folks have heard of the Bozeman Yards project in the Northeast neighborhood. That was a TIF project, and a total of 64 units between 2 buildings, but only 2 of those were affordable for sale at 120% AMI. So typically, to award TIF funds to a project, the project needs to meet 3 criteria. One is that it needs to be in a blighted area. 2, it needs to meet the but-for rule, meaning that the project would not occur but for the awarding of TIF funds. And three, it needs to provide substantial community benefit. So arguably for the Bozeman Yards, although I think the area was federally designated as blighted, it really wasn't blighted in terms of its practical view because it is in the Northeast neighborhood, which is really a bustling neighborhood, especially with businesses like Wild Crumb. It is arguably again that this project would not occur but for the awarding of TIF funds because there are plenty of developers who would like to build in that area, and this being a luxury development, it would probably be built anyway. And then there's no question that this luxury development does not provide substantial community benefit because only two of the units out of the 64 are affordable at 120% AMI. So Bridgeview, which is a community housing trust, is another example. It received $15 million donation from a private donator, produced 33 affordable units, but also subsidized luxury units with $3.5 million. So essentially, although Bridgeview has provided a substantial number of affordable units, and it certainly is a better example of what can be done with subsidies than the Bozeman Yards.
So, as we showed before, we have a very high vacancy rate, at least 20% for multifamily, which is what a lot of our new development has been. And so that's actually a really unhealthy vacancy rate, unhealthy for an investor, for example. If an investor was going to build in this market, but it's seeing that high vacancy rate, that means that that market is saturated and they won't get the returns that they want. So some of those projects in the pipeline that are especially not offering any affordable housing, they might pull out because the project that they thought they could get a lot of profits from might not have the same returns if they're sitting vacant and it's hard to fill. So we're actually seeing a pretty unhealthy vacancy rate, except for when you're looking at specifically some of our older units. Those have very low vacancy rates because those are what we would call naturally occurring affordable housing. They have been there, the structure is paid off to most of the extent, so they can offer these cheaper rents and have stable tenants in those or owner occupied. So with this, we've seen that first time home buyers, I think everyone has seen this either personally or knows someone who is not even able to consider home ownership at this point with this market, record low home ownership or first time home buyers. So the issue is that the market is very unstable right now, and we're having an oversupply of a housing that's not meeting a community need. So the city has mentioned that maybe during peak COVID, growth was somewhere around 6%, but in the last year it slowed down to 1.4%. Part of that they attribute to the unaffordability of Bozeman, that people can't move or stay here, and also because some of these investors might be pulling out, seeing that some of this market's saturated. So some of these projects that might be with the slowing of this market could be argued that there's some form or some trend towards a moratorium unrelated to whether this initiative happens or not, just due to the market conditions that we've seen lately. I think we'll address some of these with the question later. You guys sent us some specific questions, so we'll address some of these in more in depth of some of the major criticisms. Let me take this one too. Okay. And so just to kind of summarize what this initiative, the Water Adequacy Award Initiative, aims to do. It's really about giving residents a lasting voice in how water is allocated in new development. So making sure that some of that water is allocated to housing that people can afford. Also that we can think about once we are better meeting our housing needs, that we can think about water conservation for things other than just housing as well. We're trying to promote water conservation again for a wider watershed health, or aquifers or rivers or ditches. If we're only conserving water to build housing, then we can't even have the capacity to think about those wider watershed benefits that we need to be conserving for as well. This initiative is trying to add another housing tool to our toolbox. We have heard time and time again that we have a very limited toolbox for a variety of reasons, some of them from the state. But this is a way that we can leverage a finite resource to get a community need in a time that we have limited leverages. As we said, incentives such as parking are not an effective incentive anymore. So how else can we try to get some of that affordable housing? The goal of this initiative is to try to get a better balance among affordable market rate and luxury housing. So they ensure that is allocated to housing that the community needs. So instead of having housing that people can't afford, that's still resulting in a workforce being pushed out, how can we better meet our housing needs with our finite resources that we have? So lastly, one of the goals of this initiative is to sprinkle affordable housing throughout the city and mixed income developments. So instead of having an affordable housing section or building on one part of town and then luxury parts on other side of town, thinking about every new development should have some mix of affordable and market rate units, and that builds a stronger community and meets our affordable housing needs. Okay, you all sent us a list of questions, and so we'll go through those questions now. Number one, what inspired your group to create the Ward Initiative?
Okay, so as a group, we had various interests, but essentially, after talking together for a while, we had a collective concern about the city's finite water supply and how that is being directed. We're concerned about how many people who work and currently live in Bozeman are actually getting priced out because it is getting too expensive to rent or to buy. And also what appears to be too much luxury development, not enough affordable housing development. Our infrastructure cannot handle the growth. Certainly, we have shortages in first responders. And also, in general, collectively agreed that the city commission, they seem to have an inability to see that their priorities should be the collective priorities of the Bozeman community as a whole.
Okay. Number two, what are the professional experiences of the people who make up the Ward Working Group and contributed to developing this?
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in the slideshow, but Ward's Working Group members come from a variety of socioeconomic and educational and professional backgrounds. For example, teaching, working in the nonprofit sector, financial analysis, real estate appraisal, environmental science, environmental law, fish and wildlife management. And we are all local, grassroots, intergenerational, and a mix of renters and homeowners. We are bakers, union members, biologists, beekeepers, teachers, students, and others who are working to make Bozeman an affordable place to live where you work.
Number three, does the Ward Working Group have any paid positions or paid door knockers or anyone doing other advocacy?
Okay, so the core working group members, we do not get paid. We are all volunteers. This past summer, we did pay some college age folks to help collect signatures to get the initiative on the ballot. And we pay one individual to help me with financial reporting for the Montana Commissioner of Political Practices. To date, our total expenditures are about $6,000.
Number four, in one of your recent public comments, you shared that the Ward Working Group actually created the initiative in 2024 and were approved to collect signatures, but decided to pause because of so many other issues on the ballot in 2024. Could you share more about this and why you chose to move forward this year? I believe that was my public comment. We submitted a version of this initiative in 2024 and did get approval to collect signatures. The Bozeman City Attorney, who has to review the initiative, ruled in 2024 that it was a special election year. So that would mean that by state law, it would require 25% of Bozeman voters versus 15% in order to get that initiative in the ballot. Same amount of time within 90 days. There were also, you might remember, 3 statewide ballot initiatives that were collecting signatures, as well as another local ballot initiative, the Bozeman Plastics Ordinance, that was also trying to get what the city had determined was 25% of Bozeman voters' signatures to get it on the ballot. So, given the limited time and us all being volunteers, we as a working group determined that it wouldn't be feasible for us to collect that 25. I think it was nearly 8,000 signatures within the time frame. So we decided as a group to withdraw it, especially since some of the core working members were interested in some of these other campaigns, so we're at capacity. So we resubmitted a very similar version. There were a few minor changes in the version that we submitted in 2025. Probably one of the biggest changes was changing the for sale affordable to 120% AMI instead of 100 AMI, because we were hoping that would be more inclusive of some prospective homeowners or 2 salaries to qualify for these affordable for sale units. So this year in 2025, the Bozeman City Attorney ruled that it was a general election year. So by state law, it would only require 15% of Bozeman voters, which we were able to get within the 90 days. Question 5, there were some surprising groups. There have been some surprising groups that have spoken out against Ward, including Bozeman Tenants United and Forward Montana, who have also been very active advocating for affordable housing in Bozeman, and who also advocate for policies related to climate change. Their position against Ward is contrary to other positions they hold. If you had a guess, why do you think this is? So I won't and can't speak on behalf of any other group, but in my experience advocating for affordable housing, there kind of seems to be 2 major schools of thought in approaching housing. The first being that housing at any price point is beneficial if it adds to our supply. And the most important thing is to increase supply enough that the affordability will eventually trickle down and put pressure on the market. The other school of thought, which I and other members of the Ward Working Group fall under, is that when we have constraints such as a finite water supply, there's actually a price to building unaffordable housing. And if we have too much of that, if we don't have the right balance between affordable housing and unaffordable housing, then we'll actually consume some of our finite resources before we can actually build enough affordable housing. So we believe that we need to be more intentional if we want to get affordable housing. It won't just happen by pure supply and demand if that supply is not meeting the demand. So we believe that there is an affordability crisis, not a housing supply crisis. Some of the other groups that I've seen in the housing space have also vocally advocated for increasing density as a way to prevent sprawl, as of using environmental arguments of those detriments of sprawl. In order to prevent that, we need more density, so to build up instead of building out. However, the reality that what we've seen over the last few years, decades, is that we're getting both density and sprawl. So we're building up and we're building out in Bozeman. So unless there's intentional efforts also to prevent sprawl, density by itself does not prevent sprawl. Question 6, what are your thoughts on both the Southwest Montana Building Industry, SWMBIA, and the Southwest Montana Realtors contributing a combined $125,000 to fight against the Ward initiative through the Affordable Bozeman Coalition?
So certainly it has become a David and Goliath situation. Ward challenges Bozeman's status quo development paradigm, which is allowing national and international real estate investment companies to maximize profits by building mostly luxury housing. Not surprising then that these powerful entities are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars against Ward, because Ward, assuming it passes, would require them to provide a community benefit for streamlining their projects through the Cash-In-Lieu of water rights program.
Question 7, what are your open thoughts on the City of Bozeman's educational presentations across the community and the expenditure of taxpayer funds on the Ward initiative? Do you believe they have maintained their required neutral position? Why or why not?
Okay. Although the city's current ballot education efforts may be legal under the letter of Montana state law, the city's ballot education efforts are decidedly not neutral, and thus the city's efforts do not appear to be in accordance with the spirit or intent of Montana state law with regard to neutral ballot education. I note that the city has earmarked $100,000 in taxpayer money for ballot education, and much of that education appears to be based on speculation and conjecture.
Number 8, is word about water conservation or making sure there is sufficient water supply in the future?
Okay, ward is very much about directing our finite water resources to building housing that the community needs so that no one is left out. If we continue to build out the way the Bozeman is currently doing under the city commission, then there will be no more water and very limited affordable housing. What will that do? That will create sprawl. It already has. People are leaving Bozeman and going to Belgrade, Manhattan, Three Forks and beyond just to afford a place to live. As sprawl is occurring now, it is putting more pressure on septic and well systems in the county that are not designed for it. Ward will put less pressure on water resources outside the city by limiting the movement of working folks to outlying communities.
Number 9, the city has said that if ward passes, it will likely increase the consumption of water due to pushing development out to locations with higher water usage rates than Bozeman. What is your response to this?
Okay, our response to this is a little bit interesting because we think that the city is using one speculation to justify another speculation. So essentially, the city is using one speculation, that being that Ward would push development out to the county, to support another speculation that water consumption would increase overall. However, when you use one speculation to support another, you create a chain of unsupported assumptions that cannot provide a solid foundation for any reliable conclusion.
In the past, the city has said we need the Affordable Housing Ordinance because the legislature outlawed inclusionary zoning. In the recent EPS presentation to the City Commission, the presenter described word as an inclusionary zoning policy. Does your group see it this way? Why or why not?
Okay, certainly a ward is not inclusionary zoning because that has been banned by the Montana State Legislature. By definition, inclusionary zoning is a municipal land use policy that requires or incentivizes developers to set aside a percentage of units in new residential developments as affordable for low to moderate income households. In contrast, Ward proposes to create a simple linkage program, which is a local government tool to obtain community benefit from new development. In Bozeman, Ward proposes to link a new development's need for municipal water to the community's need for affordable housing.
Your group recently said that you were told you would need 25% of registered voter signatures when you first brought the initiative forward in 2024. Why did you need 25% then, when citizen-led ballot initiatives in Missoula only required 15%? Has the city given you a reason for this?
Okay, so the 25% versus 15% signature requirement is rooted in the interpretation of unclear Montana state law. Special elections require 25% signatures, whereas general elections require only 15% signatures. The Bozeman City Attorney ruled in 2024 that it was a special election and thus 25% signatures were required. In 2024, the Missoula City Attorney ruled it as a general election and thus only 15% signatures were required in Missoula. We don't know the reasons that the Bozeman and Missoula City Attorneys ruled differently, but because the law is unclear, we just have to accept that each one of those city attorneys were correct in their interpretation.
Number 12, if Ward passes, do you think that entities will try to create legislation to fight against it, similar to the plastics ordinance? What does your group plan to do if this happens?
Okay, from the beginning of this initiative, we've taken everything one step at a time. First, we worked to get the initiative approved for signature gathering. Second, we worked to collect enough signatures to get Ward on the ballot. Now we are working to get Ward passed. Although there may be challenges if ward passes, we cannot speculate on what those might be or what we might do if those such challenges arise.
Number 13, the Affordable Bozeman Coalition has said that if ward passes, property taxes will go up. What is your response to this?
Okay, the claim by SWMBIA and their political arm, the Affordable Bozeman Coalition, that will raise property taxes again is speculation. First of all, I want to be clear that ward is not a mill levy, so it will not raise taxes in that way. In Bozeman, property taxes have risen because of increased land values that are caused in part by the city's upzoning policies. The reason that land values go up is that you can now build more income earning housing on most parcels by increasing density, as the city has done with the Affordable Housing Ordinance and the UDC. They are causing property taxes to increase. The state has also played a role in property taxes as well.
Number 14, what would you say to the argument that the passage of ward would increase sprawl? So this is another conjecture that is that ward would increase sprawl is based on a speculation that nobody would build in Bozeman anymore, and that instead of building in Bozeman, they might build in the county. So to start off, sprawl is already occurring. As I said before, we are building up and we are building out. Part of this is due to the working community not able to find an affordable option in Bozeman. They're being priced out, so they're commuting from farther in, Four Corners, Belgrade, Livingston, even beyond them. Part of this also because that the Bozeman future land use map, even though Bozeman itself right now is only about 22 square miles, the future land use map is over 70 square miles. So that means that the city, to some extent, is actively planning for growth beyond our city limits, thinking about what infrastructure they would need if such growth happens. And also part of this is that there is two different markets for people who choose to live in the city next to city services versus someone who might choose to live in the county because they want more land or they want quieter space. Obviously, some people don't have that choice, but there are people who have that choice to choose to live in that county and to live in the city. So those two distinct markets will continue to exist, and people will continue to build to those two different markets as well. So in terms of what a project built that was going to build in Bozeman, build out in the county instead, probably not the same project because most parts of the county lack the infrastructure to support the density that of the development that we've seen in Bozeman. So new annexations on the edges of town, the reason they're choosing to annex in is because they can connect to city services and support a much higher density than if they had stayed out in the county. So if a developer is looking to build a more dense project, they will probably look for infill opportunities within our existing city, or they'll choose to annex in if they want to do a higher density project. So lastly, note what does ward impact or doesn't impact. Ward impacts residential units, residential projects of 3 or more, so commercial projects not affected, as well as neighborhood scale infill, so things such as an ADU, duplexes, splitting an existing house into multiple units, those would not be impacted by ward. So those also are options to build within the city. Question 15, what are your thoughts on the city's use of TIF funds to subsidize affordable housing? And what are your thoughts on the existing Affordable Housing Ordinance? What will the ward initiative do that these two things do not?
Okay, again, we talked a little bit about TIFs in the slide presentation, but TIFs are easily misused, and thus they must be awarded judiciously. 3 conditions must be met. The project must be in a blighted area, it must meet the but-for rule, and it must meet the idea of substantial community benefit. In Bozeman, the city's awarding TIF funds to the Bozeman Yards Luxury Project was, in our opinion, a misuse of TIF funds because that project does not meet the but-for rule and it will not provide substantial community benefit with respect to affordable housing.
In regards to the Affordable Housing Ordinance, I also touched on this in our presentation, but the Affordable Housing Ordinance is relying on incentives. The major ones are increased height in a building or reducing parking requirements. The city, when they did a study, thinks that using these particular incentives can only get probably 5% in exchange. So an additional story or reducing the parking requirements, they said reasonably would only get 5% affordable units. So that's different than what we are trying to do with the water adequacy initiative, where we're trying to leverage access to our water as opposed to incentives such as reduced parking. As I noted in the presentation, recent HB 492 makes the incentive of parking particularly ineffective, especially for an apartment complex that has units. Most units are typically under that 1,200 square foot threshold, and so a new apartment complex with 0 affordable units would not be required to have any parking. And so that parking as an incentive is particularly lacking as a tool to get more affordable housing. Lastly, under Ward, if it were to pass, projects could choose to apply for TIF funds or use these incentives. They could be stacked together. It doesn't contradict. They could still use those if they wanted those subsidies or incentives. Okay. Question 16, what are the biggest flaws in the reasonings you've heard used against the Ward initiative? What is your response to these and how are you able to debunk the talking points? So a lot of the reason that we've heard about Ward has been speculation and conjecture, kind of guessing what might happen. So some of the major speculations we have heard. One is that the Ward initiative will end the Cash-In-Lieu water rights program. This is not correct because the Cash-In-Lieu of water rights option is still an option. It's an option currently in our code. It will still be an option under Ward if it passes. And it will be option the same from commercial developments, residential developments with 1 or 2 units, and any residential developments of 3 or more that include the sufficient affordable housing. So anything that's a third or more affordable would also have same access to the Cash-In-Lieu of water rights mechanism under Ward. So the city says that approximately 98 or 99% of projects recently have been using that Cash-In-Lieu of water rights mechanism that's existing in our code. And so the reason for that is because it streamlines the project much easier than finding your own water rights. So it's likely that streamlining will still be appealing to people who wish to build residential units projects that are 3 or more units, and so they will still choose to do so. Or if their project is not impacted by Ward, they can also choose to use that cash in their water rights. So the benefits of having that cash would still be possible because the cash in the water right program would continue. Another speculation we've heard is that the Ward initiative will result in a sprawl. We've heard that was a previous question. This assumes that people will build in the county instead of in the city versus in addition. So right now, as we're saying, we are getting projects in the city as well as in county. Likely both options will continue for different markets or for different reasons. So we only get more sprawl if you're assuming that project does not happen in Bozeman and instead goes to the county. So that's assuming something that people won't find a way to build in Bozeman, or build a different project that pencils in Bozeman. Yeah, I think.
Okay, so right now the city says that we have plenty of water, and that may be true for development at this point in time, but we need to be thinking long term, very long term. The reality is that our water supply is finite and will always remain so. And thus we need to be conserving water for the long-term climate resilience and long-term watershed health.
Question 17, what do you think are the biggest risks of Ward passing? I think Ward is one tool that can help address the issues of water conservation and affordable housing. But the nature of ballot initiatives, they are a single issue, and so it is only one tool. So Ward is not the end-all be-all to address the very large issues of water conservation and affordable housing. So there are many other things that need to be happening also at the same time to properly address these issues. We also need to make sure that as we update our UDC or other parts that maybe are not included in the UDC update that's coming up soon, to encourage more neighborhood scale development, make it easier to build things like ADUs if that's what a neighborhood wants, while making sure there's proper protections for natural resources such as our mature trees and wetlands. So those pieces can't be addressed in this ballot initiative, but can be addressed in other parts of our code. We need to keep thinking about ways to add additional tools. If we need different ways to subsidize the projects that we want to see, we need to think about how we want to expand our toolbox. And if we want to properly address some of the issues of sprawl, then we need to have some progress on the county and at the state level, especially in the regards to exempt wells. That is a bypass that a lot of people can access that cannot be addressed with this issue, but can be addressed at a state or county level. And then just generally, we need to have a community conversation about what we are conserving water for. So can we make sure that not just for future development or future housing, can we have some water conservation as a community, decide on conserving water for watershed health, community resiliency, and having other benefits that our watershed provides, conserving for that as well. Lastly, we have seen a lot of pushback from the city staff and commission, as we've seen with the ballot education, about the reasons why they don't think this tool is the right tool. So I hope that if Bozeman residents vote yes and board does pass, I hope that the city staff and new commission will respect the votes, the voices of residents, and give a good faith effort to incorporate ward as effectively as possible in our toolbox. And then last question, number 18, what do you think are the biggest risks of ward not passing?
Okay, so the biggest risks of ward not passing would be the status quo development paradigm will continue with our finite water supply being directed almost entirely to luxury housing at the expense of affordable housing and at the expense of long-term watershed health, aquifer health, and climate resilience.
Those were all the questions that were submitted. If you have other questions, please see our website at wardbzn.com. We also have a lot of LTEs or opinions written by folks in our working group or outside of our working group about some of the aspects that we weren't able to touch on today. If you have any other questions, you can send them and we'll try to incorporate those in future Q&As. Thanks.